Today's video is brought to you in part by Ridiculous Top 10s. Do you like ridiculous things? Do you like supporting YouTube channels? Do you have 90 seconds to spare? If you answered yes to any of these questions, check out youtube.com/at Ridiculous Top 10s. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Friday. It is another FADD Friday. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Blue Goblin, Miko the Marvelous. Get in here, we're going to see what makes him tick. We're going to start off with some basics. So let's look at just in general. Obviously, he's a Blue Goblin. He is a rogue, for whatever that means to you. Doesn't mean anything in particular to me. As we get into his stats, though, for example, generally speaking, rogues are fast. That is true for Miko. It's not universally true, but it is true for him. So let's first go through his traits, and then we'll talk about his stats, then we'll talk about his abilities, and then we'll talk about his utility. So as initially mentioned, he is fast, so he gets a little penalty to his attack and his defense. That's neither here nor there as far as most things are considered. Both of those particular stats are not that impressive for him. He's not used for attacking or for defense, so the penalty is really negligible for the most part, and certainly not a slight to the speed. He is dexterous, so he is one of the only heroes that has extra dodge chance and extra crit chance. There aren't too many that actually have that, so he's got 3% bonus to both. In terms of dodge, there are just simply not many at all. There are a total of, I'm thinking, 1, 2, looks like 3 total heroes that have a bonus chance to dodge, and he is one of them. So um, crit chance, there are a few others that have some bonus crit as well. So we won't try to count those up. Deflecting defense, receive 25 less damage from ranged attack. We don't see that too often, but anytime you get that percent reduction, that's always nice. This does come in handy when using him in PvP against a Rayla light team. Not that you're going to use him, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But reducing that range damage is nice as well. Thing to be I guess cautious about is ranged attack. I believe is physical attack, so magic attack is not the same. So I believe that ranged attacks and magic range attacks are not both considered range attacks. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. But based on the tooltips, there's essentially 4 types of damage. There's physical, melee, and range, and range or physical, melee, and ranged, and then there's magical, that is melee and ranged. That is what I believe the 4 types are. So this here hits one of those quadrants. For the most part, I'm expecting this to deal with bow and arrow and things like that, and not something like necessarily magical ranged attacks. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I did not see anything that mentions that in the tooltips anywhere. He has Stage Fright, which starts him out with Shrouded for 1 turn, and he gets 1 anytime somebody crits. Shrouded is a fantastic mechanic because it prevents him from being targeted. That's always nice. It usually guarantees that you're able to get an attack off, at least in PvP, provided he doesn't die at the hands of a daisy train of Rayla procs, for example. Great skill, or great stat for him to have. Buffs applied to him last 2 additional turns. Can't argue with that. I also want to point out that there's a typo on here. So if there's any devs that happen to watch my channel, or anybody that happens to submit defects to the devs, there is a typo here. It should say last and additional 2 turns. But anytime you get buffs up, buffs are great. But it's one of the lifebloods of this game is actually getting buffs and or debuffs. So him keeping his buffs longer is a great mechanic. And last but certainly not least is my favorite of his traits is the playing tricks. So basically, debuffs are returned back to the origin, if you will. Now, I've used Miko in PvP. I've been workshopping some teams to use Miko against Rayla teams. Most specifically, not against Rayla per se, but the silence that Jin whips out. So I've been really, really, really sick of going against Rayla teams and having Jin silence everybody on top of that. So not only do you have to go through their whole rotation and get hit by every one of their guys, but then when it actually is your turn, you can't even do anything. So even if you brought somebody handy along that was going to be able to do something, they end up getting nullified because Jin just silences them. So I know a lot of people will just use light team versus light team. My goal is to find alternatives to that. That's why I've been looking at Miko for PvP. We're not going to do any PvP today because I don't have a viable team workshopped for that yet where it's going to do wonders. But if you do want to practice with him, put Miko first and put him against a Rayla light team. He will not get silenced, and in fact, none of your team will get silenced. That's the best part about it is because all of your allies start with it. So it doesn't silence all of them. It's not going to silence Rayla, which she's still going to do her thing. Um, but it silences Jin and prevents him from silencing you. So it lets you actually do stuff on your first turn if you're able to survive. If you brought your own, you know, fast heroes, for example, they could actually do something um, to survive, maybe. Like I said, they have to survive Rayla's onslaught to start with. But it's a nifty little mechanic. I like it quite a bit because it can't be stolen, copied, purged. And then if you happen to bring goblins into PvP, they get 2 stacks. But um, so give that a workshop yourself and see if you can't come up with a good Miko team. I will do some PvP features with Miko later on in the year once my roster is a little bit more leveled out to the place that I want it to be. Looking at his actual stats now. So, Miko, just as a forewarning, he is nothing special in any capacity. So, I have him currently at 4 stars. That's neither here nor there. I think when he gets to be 5 stars, he'll be a little bit better. But comparatively speaking, he is very low on the totem pole. Across the board. So I looked at his numbers in comparison to where his level is at, and basically all the other heroes where their levels are at as well. Miko is in the bottom third in just about every category. Now, that's to be expected in a lot of instances because he does lose a bit from being fast here, so his attack and defense are reduced. He also doesn't have any type of a bonus to it, to his attack, like, say, Abigail does, where she's got that extra 15% on top of that. He just gets his star bonus, and then he gets the fast penalty, and then it's ultimately down. So his attack, comparatively speaking to someone like Squinch, for example, is radically different. So Squinch at the same level, for example, his attack is like 1600. So it's 50% higher basically than Miko's. Um, so attack wise, like I said, with a rogue, you're not expecting a ton of attack. You're expecting more of utility, and a lot of times you're expecting that speed. Defense, 10, 18. Again, that's way towards the bottom. Not the worst, but it is pretty low. Skill doesn't really matter for him, and max health is modest, but it is still in the lower half or lower third, if you will. Where he does make things up, like I said, his speed, also his crit chance is higher, so that does add a little bit extra to his attack for the most part. However, a 3%, 5%, whatever crit rate, in this case 8%, still ultimately not very high. If he had a crit chance of like 50%, we'd be talking about some serious damage being pumped out. But ultimately speaking, anybody's crit chance, there's not many people in the game that I'd value their crit chance at all, except for the 4 or 5 people that have a bonus and have it at 11%. Otherwise, it's modest. In this case, 8%. What is that? It's 1 out of 20. 1 out of 10 is 10%. 1 out of 20 is 5%. So it'd be whatever. 1 out of 15. Let's call it. It's not likely to occur. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that's not likely to occur on any given attack. So stats wise, like I said, Miko, you're not using him for the stats. So let's look at his abilities, and we'll talk about why you might use him. For all intents and purposes, Miko is fabulous for PvE. He just is. He's a great dungeon runner. He keeps the team alive during tough dungeons with a variety of skills here, and he's good for the tower as well. I'll talk about the tower in just a little bit here. So as far as his basic attack goes, it's 597. I mean, if you remember from last week, it's better than Augustus for the most part. His basic attack is a little over 50% of what his attack stat is, which by comparison, I don't have many others right now logged out. But I assume that's roughly par for the course for a lot of instances, right around half of their attack stat. His first skill, again, nothing to write home about. It purges up to 1 buff on all enemies, so that's nice. So it's sort of an AOE there, and then ultimately the skill itself hits 3 random enemies. So the buff purge will happen on everybody, and then it does 406 damage. That 406 damage, if you recall right from the previous one, 590, it's just over 50% of what his basic attack is. So that's hitting 3 times. So 406 times 3, 1218, which is ultimately going to be just about at his attack rating. So nothing fabulous. It'll be about 1 times. Comparatively speaking, other people that do their skills when they whip out, 1.5 times, 2 times, 3 times their attack rating. It's a little bit more controllable because it's random. I don't rely on it for anything. It's such low damage that it really isn't going to matter. The whole purpose of using this one here is to ultimately remove buffs. Particularly, you're going to use this against taunters. So the nice thing about Miko is you don't have to use this on the first turn. So if you run into instances where somebody doesn't taunt the first turn, you're able to save this, provided that he stays alive for the next turn. Now in PvP, that's going to be a tall order because he's not armored like other goblins. So he can die pretty easily because his stats are pretty modest. So you need some sort of other protective mechanic to keep him alive in order to maybe purge taunt in the second turn. What I typically recommend the first turn with is his second ability, which starts charged, which is the Mocking Blow. So it does 1400 damage. This is probably actually his best attack, and the fact that it starts powered means you get to use it every single time. So in this case here, yeah, 1400. It does, I guess, let's see, 1400 over his basic attack. Does a little over, 1 times his basic attack. So not too bad if you ask me. But like I said, you're not really using him for attack. The whole reason you're using this is to ultimately silence somebody. So great for the tower because you can bring him in and use that. Generally, you're going to have your skills charged when you're doing the tower. And then lastly, one of his not just him, but one of the most unique abilities in the game, and probably his neatest ability. It's not his best one. Ultimately, I prefer his silence over anything. It has the most guaranteed and most consistent utility. But this take a break is actually like It's almost like a pseudo taunt, or it's a pseudo shield, if you will, or pseudo immunity. You could call it a number of different things, but it replaces the ally with a copy of him for 3 turns. Now, why is that useful? In PvE, when you're running dungeons with, say, Nub Nub and Bramble, and then Squinch and Miko, or maybe even if it's not Gretel, you're running, or you're not running Bramble, you're running Gretel instead. Pretty indifferent on which one you'd pick. If you run into a dungeon that has a surprise floor that has more fire people than you're used to, and you're under leveled, this particular ability will be a good buffer against that. It will, one, help you kill those fire heroes, and two, it'll prevent fire heroes from nuking your green goblins. Generally, Nub Nub is pretty safe, anyways. He's not getting wiped very easily because he's got very good defense. But people like Gretel can't soak much. Bramble's probably going to be okay, but his attack is really weak. Swapping out Bramble with a water hero against fire, not only do you lose that elemental disadvantage, but then you gain an elemental advantage. This is also great in the tower as well. If you wanted to use your goblin team, for example, but then you run into somebody that you just don't want to, or you want to protect somebody, this particular skill here is great for soaking up an ability that's going to happen. So, because you're fast, you generally get to attack first. So if you wanted to use this on somebody that's going to have a high-powered first attack, like Ponti's going to whip out a Doom Bolt, you're worried about it hitting somebody specific. Generally, you know how it's going to go. The AI will target kind of the weakest person and shoot them. So you could use this skill on that person. You have to remember that using that skill on that particular person might alter the targeting priority as well. So you have to use it cautiously. But it's basically a free hit. So even if they one-shot your clone, then it just brings your other person back in. Now, I don't necessarily advise using this as the first wave of attacks. I generally still suggest, like you see with all my tower videos, to run in with a tower fodder team first, and you know, soak up the main damage that way. But this is a good mechanic on that front too. You can't really use that in PvP because you can see that the energy cost is 6 turns. A PvP round is simply not going that long, and even if it goes that long, um, I don't think you'll need it at that point. So usually, if PvP goes 6 turns, you're working on cleanup and dealing with people that are just slow to kill. Um, but most of the time, you're not going to you know get to use that. So all things considered, Miko he's nifty. He's a great complement to the dungeon running for PVE, and really kind of decent in the tower. We will work on him in PvP. He ultimately shines when he's with goblins. Not many people are going to use goblins in PvP. So my general recommendation is use them for fun, use them when you need to, use them for events, but he won't shine in too many areas for you due to his low stats. So that's all that I got for you today. I hope everybody has a great night and a fantastic weekend. We'll see you next time. Thank you for watching, and remember, I make YouTube videos for the American working man, because that's what I am, and that's who I care about.